Hello, sisters and brothers. Our devotional for today, April 17, is a reflection on My Utmost for His Highest, a series of devotionals written by Oswald Chambers. You can always find the link to the daily devotionals at utmost.org. And the text that we're looking at today comes from the last chapter of the Gospel of John, John 21. And this is a story that takes place after Jesus had risen from the dead and he had appeared to his disciples. And this is when he was helping them to catch their large, miraculous catch of fish. And we'll start at verse 6. John 21, verse 6. He, being Jesus, said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of a large number of fish. Verse 7. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. And the devotional is titled All or Nothing. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment and plunged into the sea. John 21, verse 7. Have you ever had a crisis in your life in which you deliberately, earnestly, and recklessly abandoned everything? It is a crisis of the will. You may come to that point many times externally, but it will amount to nothing. The true deep crisis of abandonment or total surrender is reached internally, not externally. Let me read that again. The true deep crisis of abandonment or total surrender is reached internally, not externally. The giving up of only external things may actually be an indication of your being in total bondage. Have you deliberately committed your will to Jesus Christ? It is a transaction of the will, not of emotion. Any positive emotion that results is simply a superficial blessing arising out of the transaction. If you focus your attention on the emotion, you will never make the transaction. Do not ask God what the transaction is to be, but make the determination to surrender your will regarding whatever you see, whether it is in the shallow or the deep, profound places eternally. If you have heard Jesus Christ's voice on the waves of the sea, you can let your convictions and your consistency take care of themselves by concentrating and maintaining your intimate relationship to Him. As we've discussed before, Chambers is clearly someone who does not place great emphasis on how we feel in our relationship with God, in our journey of faith with Jesus Christ. It is about how we respond to God. And in order to do so, Chambers argues that you have to set aside how you feel, that you have to set aside any external crisis and focus on the internal decision on your will. That is the key surrender that we need to make, is the surrendering of our will. And this is not the story where we talk about walking on water with Jesus and we use the example of Peter. This is Simon Peter, who realizes it is the Lord, and he wants nothing else but to be with him. And so he disregards where he is. He leaves the boat and makes it to shore. And then the scripture says he was about 100 yards away. We all need some examples of Simon Peter in our life. He does some pretty reckless things. And yet we also look at what happens to his life following Jesus' death and resurrection. And we see that, he was a rock in many ways. In fact, soon after this story, in Scripture is where Jesus reinstates Peter for the times that he had been denying him before Jesus was crucified. So soon after this, Jesus asks him 3 times, "Do you love me?" And Simon Peter does, and he is reinstated. So to say that we need some Simon Peter in our life, we need some examples of it, we do, because there are times where we're going to be asked to surrender what our desires are, giving up our right to ourselves. And I've had experiences like that, where God has truly showed himself faithful. I remember there was a particular point in time, this was a little over 7 years ago now, where I gave up a full-time job without having a safety net, without knowing what was coming next. And God showed up in very miraculous ways. I've also seen God show up to provide when I extended myself to help others, even when other people from the outside looked and said, "This is crazy. You shouldn't be doing this." So we need those examples. We need those stories of faith in our life, so that it emboldens our faith and it becomes an example for others. So as you're wrestling with that today, or even coming up soon, what do I need to surrender? Just remember, it's not about how you feel, but it is about how you respond to Jesus' call upon your life. Thank you as always for listening. Be safe and stay well.